Loneliness was a physical entity for Zola. It was a cold, heavy blanket that settled over her shoulders the moment she walked into her painfully quiet apartment, and it only grew heavier on nights like this. New Year's Eve. From her small window on the 19th floor, the city below was a riot of joyful light and sound, a vibrant, sprawling celebration she was entirely separate from. She could see the bursts of fireworks in the distance, hear the faint thumping bass of music from parties in nearby buildings, the cheerful, drunken shouts of people in the streets. Inside, the only sound was the hum of her refrigerator and the rustle of leaves from Spike, her perpetually sad-looking fiddle-leaf fig. She'd bought him 6 months ago, full of optimistic notions about nurturing something, about bringing life into her sterile space. Now, half his leaves were brown and curled. He was a living, breathing metaphor for her own failure to thrive. She traced the rim of her mug of lukewarm tea, her rich internal monologue a familiar, self-deprecating hum. What did you expect? That you'd suddenly become the kind of person who gets invited to parties? An orphan with no family and the social grace of a startled meerkat? Her job was the only place she felt confident. As the executive secretary to Mr. Kim Min-jun, the notoriously demanding and impeccably dressed CEO of a powerful logistics firm, a firm rumored to have much deeper, darker roots, she was a model of efficiency. She anticipated his needs, managed his impossible schedule, and maintained a flawless professional barrier. He was brilliant, intense, and, in a way that both terrified and fascinated her, deeply solitary himself. She often saw him staring out his vast office window, a look on his handsome face she recognized because she saw it in her own mirror every day. A profound, unbreachable aloneness. But that was at work. Here, in her beige box in the sky, she was just Zola, a 25-year-old woman whose only plan for the biggest night of the year was to watch the countdown on a fuzzy television channel and be in bed by 12:15. The thought was so pathetic it was almost funny. She sighed, pulling a throw blanket tighter around herself and giving Spike a doleful look. "Well, buddy," she murmured to the plant. "Looks like it's just you and me again." The silence that answered was, as always, absolute. The knock came at precisely 11:58 p.m. It wasn't a timid tap. It was a firm, deliberate rapping against the wood that echoed through the small apartment with shocking authority. Zola froze, her heart instantly hammering against her ribs. Nobody ever knocked on her door. Deliveries were left outside. The super used a key for emergencies, and she had no friends who would drop by unannounced. Her mind, conditioned by a lifetime of caution learned in the foster system, immediately jumped to the worst conclusions. An angry neighbor? A mistake? The police? She crept toward the door, her bare feet silent on the cheap laminate flooring, and peered through the peephole. The distorted fisheye lens showed her something so impossible, so utterly outside the realm of her reality, that she blinked, certain she was hallucinating. Standing in the fluorescent glare of her hallway, looking intensely at her door, as if he could see right through it, was Mr. Kim Min-jun. He wasn't in one of his razor-sharp, custom-tailored suits. He was wearing dark jeans and a soft, black cashmere sweater that made his broad shoulders seem even wider. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and for the first time, she could see the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw. He looked less like a corporate titan and more like just a man. A dangerously handsome, incredibly intimidating man standing outside her apartment 2 minutes before midnight on New Year's Eve. She backed away from the door, her breath caught in her throat. What on earth was he doing here? Did she forget a crucial file? Did she make some catastrophic error in his schedule for the coming year? He knocked again, 3 sharp raps, more insistent this time. "Miss Diallo? Zola?"
It's Mignon Kim.
"I know you're in there," his voice, a deep baritone she was used to hearing on conference calls and in clipped commands, was startlingly clear through the thin wood. Her mind raced. She couldn't just ignore him. He was her boss. Swallowing hard, her palms sweating, she unlatched the deadbolt and opened the door a crack, peering out at him. "Mr. Kim? Is everything all right?" He didn't answer immediately. His dark, piercing eyes did a quick, comprehensive sweep of the slice of apartment visible behind her, taking in the drab walls, the solitary mug on the coffee table, and the pathetic form of Spike drooping in the corner before finally landing on her face. "May I come in?" It wasn't really a question. She opened the door wider, stepping back in a daze as he moved past her, his presence instantly overwhelming her small, lonely space. He brought the crisp, cold scent of the winter night in with him, mixed with a subtle, expensive cologne that was achingly familiar. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable, and held up a paper bag. "I brought tekguk," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "It's traditional." For the new year, Zola just stared, first at the bag, then at his face, her brain struggling to process the scene. Mr. Kim Min-jun, her formidable, unapproachable boss, was in her living room holding a bag of what she assumed was Korean soup. I don't understand." She finally managed to stammer, clutching the edges of her blanket like a shield. His gaze softened almost imperceptibly. "My driver was dropping off a file in my office. I remembered you mentioning you had no plans for the holiday. I also know that you live alone," he said it so simply, a statement of fact, but it landed like a physical blow. He had noticed. In the midst of his billion-dollar deals and high-stakes meetings, he had paid enough attention to her quiet, unassuming life to know she would be alone tonight. The thought was both mortifying and, to her shame, deeply touching. It's considered bad luck to enter the new year alone if it can be helped," he continued, moving toward her tiny kitchenette as if he belonged there. "And eating this soup is how we mark the passage of time. You're supposed to be 1 year older after you eat it." He began unpacking the bag, revealing 2 containers of steaming broth, a container of sliced rice cakes, and several smaller bowls with garnishes. The aroma of rich beef broth and sesame oil filled the air, a warm, savory scent that was the complete opposite of her cold, sterile apartment. The clock on her cable box blinked 12 o'clock. Outside, the crescendo of fireworks and cheers erupted. He paused, looking over his shoulder at her. "Happy New Year, Zola," he said her first name, and the sound of it in his deep voice was a strange, intimate melody she'd never heard before. All she could do was whisper it back. "Happy New Year, Mr. Kim." He gestured for her to sit at her small, 2-person dining table, the one she usually just used for sorting mail. "Please, call me Min-jun." "We are not at the office." Zola sat down hesitantly, watching as he efficiently arranged the meal. He poured the hot broth over the chewy, coin-shaped rice cakes, explaining in a low voice that their shape was meant to symbolize wealth and prosperity for the year ahead. He showed her how to add the garnishes of shredded egg, seasoned beef, and crisp seaweed. It was the most surreal moment of her life. Here was this powerful man, a figure who commanded respect and instilled fear in equal measure, meticulously preparing a traditional meal for her in her tiny apartment. The initial tension in the room began to slowly melt away, replaced by a fragile, tentative warmth. As they began to eat, the silence was comfortable, punctuated only by the soft clinking of their spoons against the bowls. The soup was delicious, the broth rich and soulful, the rice cakes perfectly chewy. It tasted like comfort, like something a mother would make. "This is really good," she said, surprised by her own voice. He looked up, a small, genuine smile touching his lips for the first time. It transformed his entire face, softening the severe lines and making him look younger, more approachable. "My grandmother's recipe. She insists on making enough for a small army every year," and just like that, a door opened. He started talking about his family, not in detail, but with small anecdotes. He spoke of a loud, chaotic household, of a grandmother who ruled the kitchen with an iron fist and showed her love through food, of siblings who were constantly bickering and laughing. It was a world so completely alien to Zola's own experience that she could only listen, captivated. He asked her about her family, and the usual knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. It was the question she always dreaded. "I don't have one," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "I grew up in the system. Foster care." She braced herself for the inevitable pity, the awkward condolences. But Min-jun just nodded slowly, his dark eyes holding hers with a profound sense of understanding. "So, you know what it is to be truly alone," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of shared experience, a bridge built between 2 lonely islands in the middle of a bustling city. For the first time, Zola felt seen, not as an efficient secretary or a tragic orphan, but simply as a person. The soup bowls were empty, but neither of them made a move to leave the table. The conversation flowed more easily now, as if his quiet acknowledgement of her past had unlocked something within her. He was surprisingly easy to talk to when he wasn't dictating memos or negotiating contracts. He possessed a stillness, an ability to listen that made her feel heard in a way she never had before. He asked about her life before she came to work for him, and she found herself telling him about the series of temporary homes, the constant feeling of being an outsider, the fierce independence she had cultivated as a survival mechanism. He never interrupted, his gaze remaining fixed on her, attentive and serious. In return, he shared glimpses of his own life that painted a picture of immense pressure and expectation. He spoke of the weight of a family legacy, the crushing loneliness that often came with being at the top, the feeling of being surrounded by people, but understood by none. He confessed that he often found the forced joviality of holidays suffocating, preferring the structured silence of his office. "My family is a lot," he admitted with a wry twist of his lips. "They love fiercely, but they are also overwhelming. Sometimes, a quiet room is the only place I can breathe." As he spoke, Zola saw the man behind the formidable CEO. A man who, like her, was an observer of life, who understood the strange comfort of solitude even while yearning for connection. The clock on the wall ticked past 2 a.m., the world outside having quieted down to a distant hum. The night felt suspended in time, a small bubble of warmth and genuine connection that Zola never wanted to pop. As a comfortable silence settled between them again, Minjun reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "I should let you get some rest," he said, though his tone suggested it was the last thing he wanted to do. "But the New Year celebrations for my family are not over. Tomorrow is the big dinner. The entire clan will be there." He paused, his gaze locking with hers, direct and unwavering. "I want you to come. As my guest." The invitation hung in the air, so monumental and terrifying that Zola's breath hitched. Go to his family's dinner? Her? The socially awkward orphan? Meet the loud, chaotic family he'd just described? Panic flared in her chest, hot and sharp. "Oh no, I couldn't possibly," she rushed to say, her hands fluttering nervously. "I wouldn't want to intrude." "You would not be intruding," he stated calmly, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I am inviting you. I want you there." He saw the fear in her eyes, the reflexive urge to retreat back into her shell. "Zola," he said, his voice softening again. "You don't have to be alone anymore." His words, a direct echo of her deepest, most painful longing, stripped away all her defenses. It was a simple, powerful promise, an offer of belonging so profound it made her want to weep. She looked at this surprising, complicated man who had shown up at her door and dismantled her loneliness piece by piece, and for the first time in a very long time, she chose to be brave. She took a deep breath. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll come." A slow, brilliant smile spread across his face, and it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. The next day, Zola woke up to a world that felt fundamentally altered. The gray morning light filtering through her window seemed less bleak, and the silence of her apartment felt less like a crushing weight and more like a temporary pause. The ghost of savory broth still lingered in the air, a phantom reminder of the impossible night she'd had. Her mind replayed the events in a continuous, dizzying loop. The authoritative knock, Minjun standing in her hallway, the shared meal, the quiet confessions, and finally, the terrifying, exhilarating invitation. Panic, a familiar old friend, tried to claw its way back up her throat. What had she been thinking? Agreeing to go to his family's dinner was madness. She was Zola Diallo, a woman whose most successful social interaction of the last year involved a brief, pleasant chat with a grocery store cashier. She owned exactly one dress suitable for such an occasion, and it was a sensible, professional navy sheath that screamed, efficient secretary, not meet the family. She imagined a house full of elegant, powerful people just like Minjun, all silently judging her cheap shoes and her awkward attempts at conversation. They would see right through her. They would know she didn't belong. She was halfway to calling him to cancel, her thumb hovering over his contact number, when a text message lit up her screen. It was from him. "Good morning. I will pick you up at 3. Don't eat lunch. My mother considers it a personal insult if you don't arrive starving." It was so direct, so matter-of-fact, it short-circuited her anxiety. He wasn't giving her an out. He was expecting her. He wanted her there. Taking a shaky breath, she typed back a simple, "Okay," and the decision was made. The hours leading up to his arrival were a blur of frantic preparation. She showered, did her hair and makeup with more care than she had in years, and put on the navy dress, staring at her reflection with a critical eye. Was this okay? Was she okay? At precisely 3 o'clock, another text came. I'm downstairs. When she stepped out of the elevator, he was waiting for her, leaning against a sleek black car that was so luxurious it looked out of place on her modest street. He was wearing a tailored gray coat over a dark turtleneck, looking every bit the powerful CEO, but his eyes, when they met hers, were warm and reassuring. He opened the passenger door for her, his hand gently guiding her in, and the simple, courteous gesture sent a flutter through her stomach. The drive to his parents' home was filled with a comfortable silence, a stark contrast to the nervous energy thrumming through Zola's veins. He seemed to sense her anxiety as he reached over and placed his hand briefly on her knee. They will love you, he said, his voice a low, confident rumble. Just be yourself, the advice, while well-intentioned, was terrifying. Being herself had always resulted in being alone. As they pulled into the driveway of a large, beautiful home buzzing with light and sound, her heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This was it. The door swung open before they even reached it, and a whirlwind of warmth, noise, and the most incredible smells washed over her. A tiny, formidable-looking older woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and Minjun's same determined jaw stood in the doorway, wiping her hands on an apron. You're late, she announced to her son, her tone brusque but her eyes sparkling. She then turned her gaze to Zola, a look so intense and appraising it made Zola feel like a specimen under a microscope. And you, the woman said, her voice surprisingly warm. You are too thin.
Come in, come in.
We must feed you, Minjun's mother, Mrs. Kim, had spoken. Zola had arrived. The interior of the Kim family home was the physical embodiment of chaos and love. Every surface seemed to be covered with either food or family photos, and the air was thick with the overlapping sounds of loud conversation, laughter, and a television blaring a sports game in another room. People were everywhere. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and siblings who all seemed to share the same vibrant energy. Zola was immediately swept into the fold, introduced to a dizzying number of faces whose names she instantly forgot. Minjun stayed close, his hand a constant, grounding presence on the small of her back, his voice a low murmur in her ear as he provided a running commentary on who was who. That's my sister, Minhee. Don't lend her money. That's my uncle. He'll try to talk to you about politics for an hour. Just nod and smile. And that. He nodded toward a serene-looking elderly woman sitting in a comfortable armchair, watching the chaos with an all-knowing glint in her eye, is my Halmoni, my grandmother. She's the real boss. They were finally seated for dinner at a massive table that was groaning under the weight of at least 20 different dishes. Bowls of japchae, plates of glistening bulgogi, vibrant platters of banchan, and a huge, steaming pot of galbijim were passed around with dizzying speed. The family ate with the same noisy enthusiasm with which they lived. The interrogation, as Zola had privately dubbed it, began almost immediately. Questions came at her from all directions, fired off rapid fire between bites of food. So, you work for my grandson? The grandmother, Halmoni, asked, her voice raspy with age, but clear as a bell. Yes, Zola managed, her voice barely a squeak. For 2 years now, is he a good boss? Or is he as grumpy at work as he is at home? His sister, Minhee, chimed in with a mischievous grin, earning her a glare from Minjun. She has to say you are a good boss. She doesn't want to be fired. An uncle shouted from down the table, which was met with a roar of laughter. Zola felt her cheeks burn, a deer caught in the brightest, most loving headlights she had ever encountered. She felt Minjun's leg press against hers under the table, a silent message of support. She took a deep breath. He's demanding, she said carefully, choosing her words. But he's fair. And brilliant, the table went quiet for a beat, all eyes on her. Halmoni studied her face for a long moment, then a slow, pleased smile spread across her wrinkled face. She nodded once, a gesture of profound finality. Good answer, she declared. She is smart, Minjun. And she has honest eyes. Don't mess this up with that. The interrogation was over. Halmoni had given her verdict, and just like that, Zola was no longer a guest. She was a person. After the whirlwind of dinner, as the family began to clear the mountain of dishes with the same chaotic efficiency they did everything else, Minjun leaned in close. "Come with me," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. He took her hand, his long fingers lacing through hers, and led her through a sliding glass door at the back of the house into a serene, snow-dusted garden. The sudden quiet was a balm to her overstimulated senses. The cold night air was crisp and clean, and the only sounds were the distant hum of the city and the soft crunch of their feet on the stone path. The garden was beautifully arranged with stone lanterns and dormant, elegantly shaped trees, creating a pocket of perfect tranquility. For a few moments, they just stood in silence, breathing in the cold air, their hands still intertwined. Zola looked up at his profile, silhouetted against the ambient light from the house. In here, away from the boisterous energy of his family, he reverted to the quiet, intense man she knew from the office, yet he was different now. The professional mask was gone, replaced by a vulnerability she found herself wanting to protect. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice a low murmur that seemed to wrap around her. "That was a lot." Zola let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, which turned into a small, surprised laugh. "That was the most wonderful, terrifying, and overwhelming experience of my entire life," she said honestly. "Your family is incredible." He turned to face her fully, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand. "I've never brought anyone home before," he confessed, his gaze so direct and full of unspoken emotion that it made her heart skip a beat. "I've never wanted to. The women I've dated before, they wouldn't have understood this. The noise, the meddling, the lack of boundaries. They would have seen it as a weakness. But you," he paused, searching for the right words. "You saw the love." He had seen her. In the midst of that chaos, he had been watching her, gauging her reactions, and he had understood her perfectly. The realization washed over her, warm and powerful. He lifted his other hand, his fingers gently tracing her jawline, his touch sending a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. The dramatic irony of her life was not lost on her. She, who had craved connection her entire life, was being pursued by a man who seemed to have an abundance of it. "Zola," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. She leaned in, too, rising on her toes, and met his lips. The kiss was gentle at first, a soft, tentative exploration, but it quickly deepened, filled with all the longing and loneliness and fragile hope of the past 2 days. It was a kiss that tasted of promises, of new beginnings, of a quiet place finally being found. When they walked back inside, hand in hand, something had irrevocably shifted. The family, with their preternatural ability to sense everything, seemed to know it instantly. The teasing questions were replaced by warm, knowing smiles. Halmoni gave her a sharp, approving nod from her armchair. Mrs. Kim, Minjun's mother, cornered Zola by the dessert table, piling a plate high with sweet rice cakes and fruit for her. "You must eat," she commanded, patting Zola's arm with a surprising strength. Minjun has always been too serious, too quiet. He needs someone with kind eyes to remind him to be happy. She didn't ask if Zola was that someone. She stated it as an undeniable fact. Zola felt a blush creep up her neck, but for the first time, it wasn't from embarrassment. It was from a deep, blossoming warmth, a feeling of being accepted so completely and unconditionally that it felt like a miracle. Minhee, the sharp-witted sister, pulled her aside to show her a collection of embarrassing childhood photos of Minjun, pointing out one of him with a terrible bowl haircut and a missing front tooth. "He was a terror," Minhee said with a conspiratorial wink, "but he's a good man." The best, Zola found herself laughing, a real, uninhibited laugh that felt foreign and wonderful in her own throat. She wasn't an outsider looking in anymore. She was on the inside, sharing jokes and secrets, becoming a small part of this vibrant, loving tapestry. Later, she found herself sitting on the floor with Halmoni, who was patiently teaching her the rules of a Korean card game called Go Stop. Zola was a terrible player, but the old woman was endlessly patient, her gnarled fingers tapping Zola's hand when she made a wrong move. You are a quick learner, Halmoni said, though they both knew it wasn't true. Life has made you pay attention. Zola looked across the room and saw Minjun watching them, a look of such profound tenderness and adoration on his face that it stole her breath. He wasn't just her boss anymore. He wasn't just the handsome, lonely man who had shown up at her door with soup.
He was the key.
He was the one who had unlocked a door to a life she had never dared to dream of, a life filled with noise and food and laughter and family. A life where she wasn't alone. And in that moment, looking at him looking at her, she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that she was irrevocably, completely in love with him. The drive home was the polar opposite of the journey there. The silence in the car was no longer tense with Zola's anxiety, but filled with a deep, peaceful intimacy. She felt utterly content, her body humming with the lingering warmth of the Kim family home, and her mind replaying the 100 small moments of kindness she had been shown. Her hand rested on the center console, and Minjun covered it with his own, their fingers lacing together naturally, as if they had done it 1,000 times before. He didn't let go for the entire drive. When they arrived in front of her building, he turned off the engine, plunging the car into a quiet, cocoon-like stillness. He turned to her, his face serious in the dim glow of the streetlights. "Tonight," he began, his voice low and thick with emotion, "watching you with my family, watching you laugh with my sister, and learn a silly card game from my grandmother. I saw my entire future, Zola. And it was all with you." Her heart felt like it was going to beat out of her chest. This was it. The directness, the honesty that had so unnerved her at first, was now the most precious thing in the world. There were no games, no ambiguity, just the raw, beautiful truth. He got out of the car and came around to her side, walking her to the entrance of her building. At her apartment door, the very same door he had knocked on less than 48 hours ago, changing her life forever. He stopped and took both of her hands in his. "I've been alone for a very long time," he said, his dark eyes searching hers. "Even in a crowded room, I was alone. I think you understand that. But when I'm with you, the silence isn't empty anymore. It's peaceful. You're the missing piece, Zola. You're it for me." Tears welled in her eyes, tears of joy and disbelief and overwhelming, cathartic release. The heavy blanket of loneliness she had carried for 25 years was gone, lifted from her shoulders by this incredible man. "Minjun," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. He smiled, a slow, beautiful smile that held all the promise of a lifetime. "Zola Diallo," he said, his voice dropping to a serious, deliberate tone. "I am going to marry you." It wasn't a question, but a declaration. A statement of absolute intent. And Zola, a woman who had spent her life as an observer, a woman whose only companion was a half-dead plant, looked into the eyes of her future and stepped fully into her own life. "Okay," she whispered, laughing through her tears. "Okay." 6 months later, she stood in that same chaotic, loving house, this time in a beautiful white dress, surrounded by the noise and laughter of her new family, her hand held securely in his. The lonely girl who watched the world from a window on the 19th floor was gone forever. She was home.